23. All right, everyone, please be seated. I hope everyone had a good lunch and didn't get rained on. All right, so we are back on the record. And 2019 CR10230, State of Texas versus R.C. Curtis. State and defense, are both sides ready to continue? State?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense? Yes. All right, State, it's your witness.
Doctor, if I remember correctly, we had left off with the, what was the word? The incision across the ears of the skull, and then the word you used.
Reflection.
Thank you. Reflection of the skull. So then proceeding back on that page, the next paragraph, you talk about the lacerations in the tongue. And there's a particular phrasing you use there that you saw the
Clydo.
Yes, the sternocleidomastoid muscles. What are those?
So the sternocleidomastoid muscles are the muscles that connect from the mastoid process, which is this bump behind your ear. There's a muscle that goes from there to the sternum, right where the collarbones come to the sternum. And those are the muscles that kind of bulge and help you turn your head from side to side.
My approach,
Yes.
retrieve some evidence, Doctor. And your report reflects that you saw signs of internal hemorrhage on those muscles?
I did.
And showing you what is already in evidence in State's Exhibit 137. Does 137 also show the area where the hemorrhage is that you underneath those muscles?
It does. Those muscles pretty much come right through here.
Okay.
The right muscle here. There's a corresponding one on the left side.
Okay, but your report says that you found intramuscular hemorrhage. Can we see the intramuscular hemorrhage from this photograph external of the external?
No, sir.
Okay. So then that's part of your internal examination when you comment on the intramuscular hemorrhage.
That's correct.
And what would cause the hemorrhaging of those neck muscles? Would that also be consistent with strangulation?
That is consistent with strangulation, any kind of force or trauma exerted to those muscles, and given the injuries on the skin surface, it's very likely that those injuries to the muscles and hemorrhage inside occurred at the same time.
Okay. In that last paragraph, you reflect that you saw vascular dissection shown of both internal jugular veins with lacerations at their inferior region. What does all that mean?
So you have several major blood vessels in your neck. The carotid artery is one of them. It takes blood from your heart up to the brain. And then you have jugular veins, which drain the blood from your head back down into your body to return it to the heart. And the jugular vein, there's an external and an internal. They're more superficial than the carotid arteries. And in this case, each one of the internal jugular veins, the right internal jugular and the left internal jugular, had lacerations or tears at that part at the inferior or lower region of the neck. So they're just around the clavicle or the collarbone, kind of as it leaves the neck area and returns to the heart.
Now, doctor, are you familiar with the definition of serious bodily injury under Texas law?
I've heard it before, yes.
And it's specifically defined in section 107 of the Penal Code, subparagraph 46. Just define serious bodily injury as bodily injury that creates a substantial risk of death or that causes death with serious permanent disfigurement or protracted loss or impairment of the function of any bodily organ. Would the hemorrhaging of the jugular vein or any of the injuries you documented, would that fit the definition of serious bodily injury in your medical opinion, Doctor?
Yes.
Moving on to the next page 3. What other aspects of the examination of Ms. Paulita did you find?
There in the seventh cervical vertebra, which is one of the spinal bones, as it transitions from your neck to your thorax or the part of your spine that the ribs are connected to. The seventh is the very last of the neck vertebra. It was fractured.
Did you describe the fracture with any particularity?
Well, it created what is called a stair step arrangement. So the vertebrae are stacked on top of each other like coins or books. And if this is the seventh cervical vertebra, the last one of the neck, and this is the first thoracic vertebra, the fracture separated them and caused what's referred to as a stair step. It looks very much like stair steps. It also transected the underlying spinal cord.
Right. And so what is the practical effect in the verbiage? You called it entirely fractured. What is the practical effect of an entire fracture of the seventh cervical vertebra?
Well, the vertebra, the bone itself being fractured, causes hemorrhage and pain. The spinal cord underneath it being transected causes paralysis from that area down, the nerves that are innervated from there down.
And it's, again, your verbiage in your report is entirely fractured. Sometimes you have a fracture and you can't really see it. Did you see this on an x-ray or did you see it in the internal examination?
Yeah, I saw it with my own eyes during the internal examination, and the distinction between it being entirely fractured versus, say, an in-place fracture is, again, that it created that stair step separation, as opposed to it still being aligned with just having a fracture through it, which of course happens sometimes. This was more than that. It was entirely separated and made that stair step configuration.
And the C7, is that the big bony bone in your spine? Is something you can feel in the back of your neck?
It is.
So once that separation, that complete fracture took place, what's the result?
Now, in this case, again, the spinal cord underneath was severed, so there would be no function of the muscles, part of the body innervated by the nerves below there, and those sensations by the sensory nerves from below there coming back up.
Have you ever heard the phrase paralyzed from the neck down?
That kind of thing, right?
When trauma like that is caused, does that mean thereafter that you have no sensation of pain or feeling from the body?
Well, she would still have sensation and pain from the parts of the body that are innervated above that transection.
So you still feel that from the neck up?
Correct. And in her case, at the level of C7, there would even be some sensation and movement, maybe of the shoulders. Those nerves don't exactly correlate straight across, the nerves kind of angled downward. So there would still be some sensation of the shoulder area, but not much below that.
What else did you see when you're in your examination, be it external or internal, of the trunk?
So the trunk, which is that part of the body, that is below the neck, but not quite the legs or the arms. She had a bruise, contusion, here at the apex of the right shoulder. Another contusion was in the right clavicle area that we saw in one of the photos earlier. And then that small abrasion right over the sternum in the center part of the chest. So that was really it externally.
At the bottom of the second paragraph under the, did you mention, how many rib fractures did you see?
Internally, there were, looks like 8 rib fractures on the left. And then on the right, there were 7.
So is it fair to say you found evidence of a total of 15 rib fractures?
That's right.
The report indicates that you found an accumulation of blood in the chest, both left and right chest cavity. Can you educate the jury as to what might have caused the pooling of blood in the chest cavities? Where specifically are the chest cavities? What do you mean?
The chest cavities are where the lungs sit. So you have a right chest cavity and the left chest cavity. And that's the area that is separated from the abdominal cavity by the diaphragm. And then it's also bounded, obviously, by the rib cage. And so that part of the body that's encased within the rib cage, but not counting the heart, and it's not either of the chest cavities. And so on her left chest cavity, she had about 380 milliliters of blood, and on the right, about 260. And given all those rib fractures and the lack of any other obvious areas that were lacerated or injured, it seems likely that those blood accumulations came from tears of the intracostal vessels, those vessels that sit on the inferior or underneath side of each rib. Each rib has a set of blood vessels that runs on its undersurface. And so, you know, a rib fracture, you stand a chance of tearing those blood vessels. And in this case, they bled into the chest cavities.
And with both the entire fracture of the spinal cord at C7, the fractured ribs, the accumulation of blood inside the chest cavity, would those injuries themselves each fit the definition of serious bodily injury?
Yes.
Did you see any other internal damage?
The inferior edge of the liver had a small laceration or tear. The liver sits on the right side of the abdominal cavity, the upper part of the abdominal cavity, and it's tucked right up underneath the diaphragm, which separates the right chest cavity from the abdominal cavity. And there was a laceration or a tear on that front part of the liver as it sits under the rib cage.
What else did you do in your examination, sir?
Well, of course, as part of the examination, we want to document and collect any potential trace evidence, considering the fact that she had this trauma and she was nude at the scene. You know, standard best practice is to perform a sexual assault kit, and that consists of long cotton swabs, or like Q-tips, really long. 2 are swabbed around the mouth and placed in the back of the throat for a couple of minutes. Same in the vaginal orifice and same in the rectal cavity. Then those are taken and prepared, smeared onto glass slides for potential examination under the microscope, and then preserved for potential studies later if needed. We also collected fingernail tips, clipped those with clippers and saved those separately packaged, right hand from left hand, again for potential studies if anybody wanted to do that in the future. I don't think there were other pieces of trace evidence that were collected.
Was blood drawn for the purposes of identification during your examination?
Well, blood is drawn. We collect some samples in tubes for toxicology studies, but also samples are collected and placed on what's called filter paper to preserve. Obviously, blood is a very good source of DNA for the decedent. And so, on all cases, we collect those and save them if it ever comes up again that it's needed for the future. If anybody ever wants to do any testing on that, we collect it.
And do you know that blood was drawn in the course of performing this autopsy?
Yes.
Ms. Boyd. Did the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office, was it the policy then to conduct a documented chain of custody of the blood that's drawn that supports an autopsy?
Yes.
Was it your responsibility as the physician performing that autopsy to ensure that that's done?
Yes.
Approach her.
Yes.
I'm showing you what has previously been marked as States Exhibits number 126B for identification. And what is the label that covers 126B for identification? What does it contain?
It says swabs, smears, hair samples, and fingernail clippings.
Now, you previously testified that because of the condition that the body was found and submitted nude, that you did collect evidence, fingernail clippings, swabs, smears.
That's right.
Emptying the contents of States Exhibit 126B. And inside is a plastic bag containing, I count approximately 10 items. Do you recognize the contents that are in States 126B?
Yes.
Okay, and what are the contents inside 126B for identification?
Well, there's there are the 3 cartons that hold the vaginal, rectal, and oral cotton swab, cotton tip swab that I collected. There's an envelope that has combed scalp hair, an envelope that has pulled scalp hair, an envelope with combed pubic hair, an envelope with pulled pubic hair, and an envelope with the nail clippings from the left and right hands. Then there are 3 cardboard microscopic glass slide holders that are labeled rectal smear, vaginal smear, and oral smear, respectively.
Okay. And where did you see the nail clippings from the left to right hand?
The back one here, okay.
All right, and how do you take the nail clippings? How is that done in the lab?
We have individually packaged and sterile fingernail clippers. You probably have at home in your drawer. And we use one set for the right hand, clean white towels placed under the hand. The nails are clipped. Those clippings are collected and placed in filter paper, just folded and wrapped around the nail clippings for that hand, placed into the appropriate envelope. And then that process is repeated for the other hand with separate nail clippers.
And each of those left and right hands are separate envelopes for each one.
Well, this is one envelope. There's like a sub package inside.
Okay. And do you recall, and do you see your initials on the oral swabs themselves?
Yes, my initials are on the evidence tape that I use to seal up that compartment.
Okay. And so the contents of State's Exhibit 126B, does it reflect the leave for identification? Reflect the evidence you collected during the performance of the autopsy of Ms. Paulita Boyd on October 22nd, 2015?
Yes.
Move to introduce State's 126B and evidence tendered to the defense for inspection.
All right, State's Exhibit number 126B is admitted.
Question, doctor. You mentioned when you took the oral swabs. Previously, you testified that in your examination, Ms. Paulita's teeth were clenched and the tongue trapped between it. But you said you took the swabs by even down the throat inside. How did you perform the swabs if your mouth and teeth were in that condition?
Sure. Well, first swab kind of between the lip and the gums, top and bottom, and along the sides, and then even though the teeth were clenched, there's still space enough to wiggle the cotton tip swab through them and into the back of the throat, where it swirled for a second and then you slept for a couple of minutes.
And the smears on the slides, how are the smears produced?
We have laid out before I begin 2 glass slides labeled oral, rectal, vaginal on the table. Once I pull those swabs from the mouth, rectum, or vagina, I smear them on the respective glass slides before placing them in the carton to dry.
So they're derivative of the swab of the smears are derivative of the swabs.
That's right.
Doctor, does your autopsy report also contain body diagrams?
It does.
Showing you what is marked as State's Exhibit numbers 144 and 145 for identification. Are 144 and 145 copies of the body diagrams contained in your autopsy report?
They are.
And I got foolish and ahead of myself, the report's already in evidence. Disregard. Showing you what is marked as State's Exhibit number 146 for identification. Take a moment to flip through and see if you can identify 146 for identification.
Yes, I recognize this.
And what what is 146 for identification?
Well, it's basically the blood spot card that was, it's a photograph of the blood spot card that was collected during the autopsy. And then the chain of custody documents that detail the steps, its journey.
And it is blood of who?
Of Miss Boyd, case 15-22-43.
And that was performed during the course of your autopsy.
It was.
Finally, I'm showing you what is marked in the photographs you take. Do you also take a photograph that could identify the body for those who may have known the person?
That's right. That is the ID photo, and I don't personally take that photo. That is a photograph that's taken by our autopsy tech under my supervision.
But do you recognize the photograph that states 132 for identification?
I do.
And is it part of the photos that were submitted in the autopsy report that has previously been admitted into evidence, and we've been using the pictures from?
Yeah.
Of course. And move to introduce states 132 into evidence, subject to defense for inspection. We have no objection.
All right, then states exhibit number 132 is admitted.
Finally, doctor, looking to the conclusions that you reached in your autopsy, did you, in the course of your examination, did you notice any injuries, pre-existing medical conditions, anything that may have made Ms. Boyd could have contributed to her death, made her more susceptible than normal?
Well, she had relatively mild cardiovascular disease, seemed related to high blood pressure or hypertension, and atherosclerosis, or the narrowing of the blood vessels, because fat kind of builds up in the vessel walls. But it wasn't to any profound extent. Other than that, she had the abundant injuries that we've discussed that caused her death.
Okay. Ultimately, what were the findings of your autopsy?
My findings show were that Ms. Boyd had multiple blunt force injuries and strangulation. She also had, like I said, a hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease.
Ultimately, what did you conclude as being the manner of her death?
The manner of her death was homicide.
And you previously testified, your report says the autopsy began at 9 o'clock on the 22nd of October. Can you recall, estimate, when did you make that final determination at the conclusion?
Well, I made that determination by the end of her autopsy, probably sometime in the early afternoon of the same day. Of course, I ultimately waited until the toxicology testing and all of the other tests came back before finalizing the report. But on the day of the autopsy, I was sure of the cause of death.
I know it's not an exact science, but from all the findings and observations you had, we previously had in evidence that the body was found approximately I'm showing you what's already admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit number 26. You able to read the time in State's 26, Doctor?
Yes, sir.
What time is that?
Looks like it says 3:09 on October 21st.
Okay, so the body was found 3:09 in the afternoon. Given the signs that you saw of rigor being easily broken, lividity, would you be able to make an informed estimate as to when the actual time of death was in relation to that 3:06, 3:09?
Well, really just a general ballpark idea. It seems like, considering the rigor mortis and liver mortis and their pattern, she had probably already been deceased at the scene for several hours, maybe as much as little as 8 hours, probably all the way up to and including even the 16 or 20-hour range at that point.
Aside from the autopsy you conducted, in supporting photos and filing your report, the evidence you collected, did you have anything else to do with this matter under case number 2015-2243?
Can you repeat that?
Did you do anything else besides your autopsy and writing your report?
No.
I have no further questions, sir, and I've passed the witness.
All right, defense.
Dr. McCain, you said you were a deputy medical examiner on October 15th, 2015. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you also said you were working in some other locations, Tennessee and some other areas.
I do now, yes, sir.
Okay. So is it common for medical examiners to move from place to place, kind of like they need somebody, so you go there and do it?
I'm not sure if it's common, but there are plenty of us who do it.
Okay. And there are areas that don't have a facility like San Antonio has. You just have to go there and somehow do the autopsy, is that correct?
Well, that's true, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, what I'm curious about is you talk about death by strangulation. Okay. That's one of your conclusions, is that correct?
That's right. Yes, sir.
And to the common person, strangulation would generally imply that a person dies due to what? Lack of oxygen?
Right. Well, lack of blood flow to the brain, which in the blood carries the oxygen. So yes.
And but in this case, it appears that strangulation had a alternate cause of serious bodily injury, as you referred to it as, bleeding of blood and stuff like that, and transection of the spinal cord.
That's right. So in this case, in addition to what appears to be strangulation, there were also blunt force injuries.
Okay.
I think that's what you're asking.
Okay. So basically, in that type of scenario, kinetics of it is that the blunt force injuries of transection of the spinal cord causes capillary bleeding, which basically leads to loss of blood to the brain. Is that correct?
Well, it's a little bit of a, we're mixing a couple different mechanisms
Sure.
in that scenario.
But you had many mechanisms going on in this case.
That's exactly right. Yes, sir.
Yeah. What I was curious about is read about strangulation, and generally the thyroid bone, if that's broken, it's pretty strong evidence of strangulation. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is supportive evidence of strangulation, yes.
And would you explain to the jury what a hyoid bone? Is that correct?
Sure, the hyoid bone is the bone, it's a sort of U-shaped or C-shaped bone that sits here horizontally. And it is more or less suspended just at that kind of reflection where you go from the neck to the underside of the jaw there, the chin. And it's sort of suspended here by muscles that make the floor of the mouth and other muscles that come on the front and sides of the neck. And so it's suspended there at space. When trauma is exerted to the neck, it is in the prime location to be injured.
And is that kind of a soft bone?
Like other bones, it starts out soft as you're younger, and when you get older, it's firmer and more brittle. So at 75 years of age, it's set in its way. It's all bone. There's not really any cartilage left, so it's firm bone by her age.
You also mentioned, is it the laryngeal cartilage? Was it intact? Is that correct? On page 3, top of the page.
That's correct. The laryngeal cartilages were intact.
Can you explain to the jury what that is?
Sure.
What that is?
The larynx is that tube that goes from the back of your mouth down into your lungs. It's that firm, rigid tube that you can feel and see on your neck. And it is composed of a series of rings of cartilage or the kind of flexible bone-like material. It's just a series of rings, again, stacked like quarters of coins that maintains the rigidity of that tube that goes from your mouth to your lungs.
So if you had somebody that grabbed you by the neck and more or less choked you or strangulate you, those items would be broken. Is that correct?
Not in every case.
They would not be intact.
Not in every case. In some strangulations, they are fractured. In other strangulations, they aren't.
Okay. But if you have a strangulation case without the body bleeding and stuff like that, most likely would be, because that would be the direct cause of death.
No, it takes about 4 pounds of pressure to occlude the jugular veins and kill somebody. And the cartilage, the laryngeal cartilage and the hyoid bone can withstand much more pressure than that.
Now, she was found on the floor. Would a fall off the bed have caused any injury to her?
Certainly a fall off the bed could have caused an injury to her.
And so we don't know whether the injuries occurred while she was on the bed or off the bed. Is that correct?
That's right. I don't know what position her body was in when she was injured.
Okay. Now you did some swabs, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You did the oral swab of the mouth.
I did.
Okay. And vagina and rectal.
That's right.
Okay. Did you do any swabs of the face?
No, sir.
Okay. Now a swab, what is the purpose of the swab? What kind of information are you going to get from that?
Well, the reason why I do the swabs is to collect any potential DNA evidence that might be in any of those locations.
Okay. So therefore, one thing you did not get would be DNA evidence from somebody touching her on the face or the neck or something like that.
Correct.
Okay. So you wanted to get a DNA from inside her mouth, vagina, and rectals, basically. Is that correct?
What was the first part of the question?
The DNA in your situation, the swabbing you conducted, okay, would lead to DNA evidence inside the mouth or around the lips. Is that correct?
That's right.
And around the vagina, the exterior and interior,
That's right.
and the rectum, the exterior and interior.
That's right.
But omitting the facial, that would have been another form to obtain DNA from somebody holding their face down or something like that.
Well, the literature on, that's called contact DNA or transfer DNA. The literature on the effectiveness of being able to swab a person's body surface, presumably a dry body surface, swabbing that and actually collecting DNA measurable results is still sort of up in the air. I've had cases before where I have lifted DNA off of people's skin surfaces, and I've had other cases where, plenty where that did not happen.
So that's why you chose not to do
I know, I guess I chose not to do it because that identifying someone's DNA from having touched another person's face is not generally deemed as reliable and not as commonly transferred as in the opposition of that is doing a sexual assault kit and swabbing the oral cavity, vaginal cavity, and the rectal cavity.
it. And of course, in a case as this, you don't have the ability to obtain from the person, who did it, right?
That's right.
Thank you, Doc. I don't have any further questions.
State,
Just a clarification, the last area where council went into what you described as touch DNA, is that common with this, the use and value of touch DNA, is that commonly accepted in the field of forensic pathology?
It's not a common or a standard of practice, so to speak, in the way that a nude woman with obvious trauma, the standard of practice is to do a sexual assault kit. It's not the standard of practice to do the trace DNA collection.
And those facts that you also listen to the report, the hyoid bone being intact, the laryngeal cartilage being intact. But you still determined there were signs of the trauma itself was presented as signs of strangulation. Is the hyoid bone being unbroken and intact, the laryngeal cartilage being intact, are those inconsistent with your conclusions of strangulation?
No.
I have no further questions, Doctor.
I have one last question. You stated the hyoid or excuse me, hyoid or bone and larynx are intact, and the airways were unobstructed and are not inflamed. What is that? The airways are not inflamed and unobstructed.
So that means there's no food, for example, or foreign object like a marble or something that's blocking the airway, and then would cause her to choke to death. The lining of the trachea of the mucosa is not inflamed or red. It doesn't look like there's any kind of infection going on. No tumors growing there, that sort of thing. In other words, that lining was normal.
So if a person would just put their hands around a person and choke them until they die, that would not happen. Is that correct?
If someone had another person's hands put around his neck and caused him to die, I would not expect for his laryngeal mucosa to have any signs of inflammation, and I would not expect for his airway to be obstructed when I do the autopsy, assuming that that person's hands are no longer crushing the airway. Was that the question?
I'm not sure. Because in this case, you have, strangulation more on the basis of blood being developed to cause that strangulation. Is that correct?
No,
No?
no, sir.
Okay. So you can strangulate somebody and will the blood still happen in the body like this?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. So you have a situation of no blood and deceased by strangulation. What do you develop that on if the airways are unobstructed?
Yeah, so when referring to whether the airway is obstructed or unobstructed, that's the inside of the tube, the airway that connects from the mouth down to the lungs, the trachea, as it's called. Her trachea was not obstructed. People who we are 1,000% sure were strangled, I would not expect their airway to be obstructed. I've never seen one that was obstructed. The obstruction comes when a person chokes to death on a bite of hot dog or a ham sandwich, or a child swallows a marble and gets stuck in the airway and chokes him or her to death. Whether Ms. Boyd was strangled or was not strangled does not change whether I expected her airway to be obstructed or not obstructed.
Would it also be subject to whether or not they had eaten recently? Because if you had, food particles available, would that kind of cause the obstructions, what you told us before? Is that correct?
Sure, yes. Food particles are commonly the thing that obstructs people's airways when they're obstructed.
And that's when you generally find the obstruction.
What was the question?
Yes, if they had recently eaten and hadn't digested all that food. That's the type of situation you generally find the obstruction.
Well, if a person is eaten shortly before death and then died for whatever reason, and it was not having choked to death on that food, then I wouldn't expect to see the airway obstructed by food. Sometimes when people die during the process of dying for whatever reason they're dying, they will sort of vomit or regurgitate some of the food in their airways while they're in the throes of agony and dying. And so we do occasionally find some food products in the esophagus, maybe in the back of the mouth, and then maybe sometimes in the trachea. But in those cases, it's just a little dribbles, crumbs of food there in the trachea, not obstructing the trachea.
Thank you. I don't know.
Just thought occurs. We had previously covered lividity, and we have pictures that you started my question. Lividity was in the back. Did you find any signs of lividity in the front on the side?
No.
And in that previous line of questioning, and I gave you the example, so if you find lividity on the back of someone who's found face down, I believe you said that you would lead you to believe that the body was moved afterwards, right?
That's correct.
And you did deem this to be a homicide. Ms. Paulita was killed by another human being.
Yes.
So with the lividity being only being found on the back, the pictures there that your investigator took indicate she was found on the back. For those strangulation injuries and trauma, that would suggest that whatever human was doing it face to face, looking at it, wouldn't it?
I think that it would suggest that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that had to happen.
Yes, I understand. And the 15 rib fractures, the internal injuries, the blunt force injuries, what amount of force could cause that?
Well,
And let me refine it, because counsel asked, with someone falling from the bed, could that cause, a fall cause the number of injuries you found in your examination?
no,
Am I overreaching? Is that maybe consistent with somebody that maybe is in a vehicle crash, no airbag?
the rib fractures, the flail chest created by that is, those are injuries commonly seen in car crashes. The broken spine is another kind of injury that we often see in car crashes, yes.
No further questions, sir.
Defense?
No more. No more questions.
All right, is this witness excused or subject to recall?
Recall.
All right, the rule has been invoked with that one.
Judge, we just put them on available, just so we can call them if we need them,
Yes.
so we can go back to work.
The rule has
Still
been
appreciate
invoked. What that means is you can't discuss your testimony with anyone. The only persons you're allowed to speak to are attorneys for the state and attorneys for the defense. Just make sure you're available if you need it for recall.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
State, call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls SAPD Detective Edward Campos.
All right, witness, please come in. I need you to take a seat here, please.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Could you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth so help you God?
Yes, sir.
All right, please have a seat. Don't touch the microphone. If it states your name for the record and spell it.
I'm Detective Edward Campos.
And if you spell the last name, please.
C is in Charlie, A is in Alpha, M is in Mike, P is in Papa, O is in Oscar, S is in Sierra.
All right, state.
Sir, what do you do in SAPD?
I'm a detective in the Technical Investigations Unit, the Video Extraction Detail.
And what are the specific duties of the video extraction detail?
We go from location to location, wherever the detectives request video collected, we go to that location. They've already reviewed the video. They specify what days, what times, what cameras they need. We go and download the video.
And do you guys, you download it yourself?
Yes,
Your section does.
our section does, where we're allowed to.
And you said detectives, you talk about an investigating detective for a crime?
Yes, sir.
And what happens to the video that your section goes and downloads?
When we get video, we bring it back to our vault and store it in there. If the detective, and usually the detective does, request a copy of the video, we send them a copy of the master copy, and then we file the master copy in our vault.
Okay. And so as an example, nowadays in 2021, a lot of homes have their own security video, ring doorbells, those kind of cameras, those things.
Yes, sir.
If that is of investigative value in a case, your section is the ones that goes and withdraws it from that home, that residence, that business.
It depends on the system, but yes, sir.
Okay. Sometimes now, if there's video from, is there any kind of video that your section does not collect at the direction of the investigating detective?
We don't collect video from usually the big chains, Walmart, Target, HEB, because they don't allow us into their systems. They have proprietary systems. They don't want us. They have trained personnel there that go and collect or produce the video that the detective requests. He contacts them, they get the video collected, and they provide it to the detective.
And so a Walmart, an H-E-B store, the detective who's doing the case, he gets it from them.
That's correct.
And then what, by procedure, what happens with the video that the detective collects?
Once any detective is sent video by email, by disk, they are required to send it to us so that we can maintain the master in our files.
Were you working in the technical, what was the name of the unit?
Technical investigations unit, the video extraction detail. Yes, sir.
Were you working in that unit in October of 2015?
Yes, sir.
Who was the supervisor of the unit then?
His name was Sergeant Brian Padir.
Okay. Did you know a Detective Simpson?
Yes, sir.
Did he also work along with you in your duties in that unit?
Yes, sir.
How do you all document when a detective asks a member of your unit to go out to the field, collect video, and bring it back? How do you document?
We have forms now. The form that we used back in 2015 has been vastly improved. The form that we used when we were out in the field in 2015 was a release form that allows us to collect the video from the system.
And so if I'm understanding the process, detective says, hey, I need this evidence. I need you guys to go get it from this place. You go do it, you get a release, you guys maintain what you got.
Yes, sir.
What does the detective work with for his investigation?
The detective that is handling the case, we send them a copy of the video that we collect.
And your section maintains the one that was retrieved from the business or the private entity.
That's correct.
Do you also maintain the documentation in the forms?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with Detective Randall Hines of SAPD?
Yes, sir. He works in homicide.
And is he an investigating detective, as you previously described?
Yes, sir.
And from your knowledge, did Hines direct anyone in your unit to go and obtain some video in October of 2015?
He requested Detective Simpson to go to, but it's Chevron on 80 on Hebron Road.
May I approach on?
Yes.
Sir, I'm showing you what has been marked as State's Exhibit number 147 for identification. Do you recognize State's 147 for identification?
Yes, sir.
And what is State's 147 for identification?
This is our consent to search and download video, the form that we filled out back then.
Okay, and who is it that filled out that consent to search form?
Detective James Simpson.
And where did he wind up going?
He went to 8558 Hebron Road.
Objection, that's gonna call for hearsay unless he went with him. It sounds like he's talking about what somebody else did.
Sustained.
In your office, in your files, do you personally know that you have video obtained from 8558 Hebron Road?
Yes, sir.
In fact, did you yourself have anything to do with the handling and management of the video that was retrieved from 8558 Hebron Road?
Yes.
What did you do with that video?
We provide copies to, in this case, Detective Hines.
What case number was the video that Detective Simpson obtained on 8558 Hebron Road? What SAPD case number is that associated with?
It's 1522-8265. It's written on the form.
And what did you say you did with the video from 8558 Hebron Road?
We stored it in the vault and provided copies to Detective Hines.
And I asked you, but you said you did make copies.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there anything that was unique about the video that Detective Simpson obtained that you noticed when you made copies? Was it accurate and current to the date?
I'm gonna object. That's gonna call for speculation. Once
He
again,
said he made the conversion, Your Honor.
All right, so this is everyone. Can I help you both approach, please? there is an objection, I'm sorry, state if you'll repeat the question. And then defense, if you have any objections to that question, of course, the court will hear those.
You, from your, do you have personal knowledge about the video that Detective Simpson retrieved?
I reviewed the video when I was asked to come to court, and it was in a format that the city does not allow to play. It's in an exe executable format. And the city usually blocks that because the city thinks it's a virus. So sometimes the video has to be converted so that they can see it on the city computers, or they have to have a standalone computer so that they can see or play the executable formats.
And if I understood your previous testimony, you converted this video yourself, correct?
I don't recall. I converted one of the videos, but I don't think that video is being used in this situation, from what I understand.
All right. To your knowledge, the video from 8558 Eden Road, is that timestamps on it? Date and timestamp?
Yes, sir.
From your knowledge, is that video, the timestamps on that video accurate?
Objection, that's gonna call for speculation.
From, if he knows, Your Honor,
Well, he can't know, he didn't go to the scene.
if he converted the video, he could have looked at it then.
All right, this is what we're gonna do. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're gonna take a 5-minute break so you all can stretch your legs. Remember, you've heard some evidence in this case, but you're not allowed to speak to each other about this case or to deliberate at all. And I saw I got the thumbs up because you're ready to take a break. All right. So I tell you what, is 5 minutes enough time for everyone? All right, could everyone please rise for the jurors? All right, everyone, please be seated. And while you all were out, we did turn the video thing around, so hopefully that works. All right, so we're gonna go back on the record. And State, I believe it was your witness.
Yes, ma'am. And Detective, the video that Detective Simpson obtained from 8558 evening.
Objection, that's gonna call for speculation and hearsay.
Um,
He can't testify where the video is from.
All right, I'll let the state ask the question, then if the defense still has an objection, the court will make it to you.
Video was obtained, Detective Simpson obtained. Did you perform any function on it to get it to Detective Hines?
I did not know, sir.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right.
No questions.
All right, thank you. The rule has been invoked. What that means is you can't discuss your testimony with anyone except for attorneys for the state and attorneys for the defense.
Yes, ma'am.
Is he subject to recall or no?
No, he's excused.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
State, call your next witness.
State calls Detective Randall Hines.
All right, you'll take a seat here, please. If you could raise your right hand for me, please. Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, if you could state your name for the record, but please, gentlemen, move the microphone around.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
I'm Detective Randall Hines.
And apologies. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Did you-
Yes, state, you may proceed.
Sir, please introduce yourself to the jury.
Detective Randall Hines. I'm with the San Antonio Police Homicide
And how long have you been an officer with SAPD?
for 26 years.
And you said you're with the homicide unit. How long have you been a homicide?
Since 2007. So 14 years.
15 years. Were you working in your capacity as a homicide detective on Wednesday, October 21st, 2015?
Yes, sir.
And are you the primary detective who worked on the case SAPD cause number 15228-265?
Yes, sir.
And if you could tell the jury, how did it come, how did you get associated or get assigned to the investigation of SAPD 2015-228-265?
I was on duty and I was next up in the rotation. We had a 7-man team at the time, and our supervisor would just put us on a rotation, and whoever was up for the next case gets assigned to it. And I received a call from patrol that there was a deceased woman, approximately 75 years old, in her apartment, and I was assigned to be the lead investigator.
Okay. Once you got assigned, what did you physically do?
I went to the crime scene, and as I recall, the address was 12200 I-10 West. I don't recall the apartment number off the top of my head.
Okay.
And when I arrived, I contacted the patrol officer who initially responded, and he stated that the door was closed.
Sustained.
Just before we get in, generally, how do you go about conducting the homicide investigation or any investigation over your tenure in San Antonio Police Department?
Well, basically, in the follow-up unit capacity, we usually get the initial call from patrol, and they tell us where they are, what they have, and that they need us to make the scene. And once we arrive at the scene, we determine what actions we're going to take from that point.
So the detective who is dispatched, he's calling the shots, he's directing where the investigation goes.
Yes, sir, for the most part, with supervisor approval.
Okay. How do you document the entire, is every investigation up and down, quick and easy, or what?
No, sir, there's some can be very complicated and some are very cut and dry. You know what happened before you left the scene.
Okay. How do you document what you do in the course of an investigation?
We write reports and talk with the crime scene unit and determine what we're going to do.
Did you prepare a report encompassing what you did in the investigation of SAP 2015-228265?
Yes, sir, I did.
Would having a copy of your report available to refresh your recollection help to support your testimony here today?
Yes, sir, it would.
Now, approach you.
Yes.
Sir, I'm showing you what has been marked as State's Exhibit number 148 for identification. What is 148 for identification?
This is the prosecution guide that I prepared in this case.
Okay, take a moment, flip through and see if it appears to be complete as you know it.
Yes, sir, it appears to be complete. There's a 4-page report attached that my supervisor also completed.
Okay. So if you can use the report to refresh your recollection as you need, just please don't read from it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so ultimately, what apartment did you go to?
Apartment 205.
And that's Stone Oak Apartments off on I-10?
Yes.
Who or what did you find when you got there?
When I arrived at the scene, I contacted a patrol officer and he had already called for a crime scene technician. And when I walked into the apartment, I saw the body of Miss Boyd in her bedroom.
Did you make, and you were called there initially because patrol reported up and you got assigned, right?
Yes, that's right.
Did you understand that day, Wednesday the 21st, when you got there, did you know what you had? As you testified, some things, you know what they are before you even leave the scene. Was this a situation like that?
No, sir, I did not know for sure what I had at the time that I left the crime scene.
Were you there when the person you called Miss Boyd, were you there when her body was removed by the medical examiner?
Yes, sir, I was.
And what did you understand was going to happen once the medical examiners had been on scene and reviewed the apartment?
Once the medical examiner takes someone's remains, they're going to do an autopsy. And then they're going to contact me and let me know what happened or what they found.
After the medical examiner had removed the body, turned out to be Miss Paulita, what did you do to apartment 205? What state was that in as you left?
I requested the crime scene unit take overall photos of the apartment, and I had spoken with the apartment manager and the maintenance man And the maintenance man told me that he could lock the apartment and keep it locked until I got back in contact with him. I asked him not to let anyone in until he heard from him.
Did you also direct anyone to collect any evidence that day?
I don't recall doing anything other than photographs.
Do you remember if the CSI Roberson was at the apartment that day on the 21st?
Yes, sir, I do. It was Roberson the first day.
Okay. And so at the end of your shift on Wednesday, the 21st, how would you describe it? Did you just have a situation, or did you have a homicide crime?
Well, I didn't know what I had. It wasn't readily available or readily discernible to me how Miss Boyd had died. I didn't know if she had fallen. I didn't know anything about what could have caused her death. So it was going to be left up to the medical examiner to tell me if I had a crime or not.
To your knowledge, was that autopsy conducted?
It was conducted the next day on the 22nd.
Right. And did you learn the results of the autopsy?
Yes, sir, I did.
And once you learned the results of the autopsy, did that then change your understanding of what had taken place in apartment 205 of the Stone Oak Apartments?
Yes, sir. I was told that it was that Miss Boyd had a lot of blunt force trauma. She had broken neck and I think strangulation. So then I knew that it was a homicide.
And so what did you do then once you learned that you're a homicide detective? It's maybe a good thing.
Mhm.
What did you do then?
I told my supervisor, I was calling him Sarge because he was a sergeant. I said, Sarge, the case from yesterday is a homicide. We need to go back out to the scene.
And did you go back out to the scene?
Yes.
And let me ask, and did you detail any other support when you went back on, if you were dispatched on Wednesday, the 21st, and the next day was the 22nd?
Yes.
Did you dispatch any other support when you went back on the 22nd?
I took members of the crime scene unit with me.
You remember how many?
I think it was Raul Hurtado, and I can't remember if anyone else.
And now when you go back and you know it's a homicide, well, did you direct somebody to take the pictures that were taken when the body was there? Was that just hedging your bet?
Repeat the last one.
Hedging your bet? Were you being cautious?
Well,
having the pictures taken?
yes, sir. That was basically I was being cautious, and because Miss Boyd was naked, I asked the medical examiner to do a sexual assault kit because I didn't know what I had. So those are a couple of things that I did just as a precaution.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so now you know you have a homicide. You bring in additional support. Was it more than one CSI that you had come back on the 22nd?
I'm not 100% certain. For some reason, Raul Hurtado was sticking out to me. I can't remember more than one showed up. I know my sergeant was there with me.
All right. Did you see anyone else at the apartment when you went back on the 22nd?
Yes, sir. Miss Boyd's daughter, her name is Brenda Boyd. She was there when I got. Well, I can't remember if she was there when I got there or she arrived after I did, but I did speak to her that day.
Did you tell Ms. Boyd, Ms. Brenda Boyd, did you discuss what you had learned earlier that day, the 22nd?
Yes, I told her that her.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. But you told her that you now had a different opinion.
Yes, did you?
Objection leading.
Right, that'll be overruled.
When I spoke with Miss Boyd, I told her that her mother had been murdered.
If you would, just from your recall, what was her reaction when she found it out?
The typical reaction you would expect from a daughter. She was surprised, shocked. I think she may have said, "Are you sure?" Things like that. I told her yes, I was sure.
As it turned out, she actually recorded you on her cell phone, didn't she?
Yes, sir. I only learned that last week. Yes.
But she herself did it. You didn't know she had done that.
No, sir, I didn't.
Did you gain any information from her while you were just talking with her over the course of the 20 seconds?
Yes, sir. I received information that she was a joint member on a bank account that belonged to Ms. Boyd. And she was able to pull up the account and give me the last 4 digits of the credit card. And she told me that it had been used on the 21st. And she told me the address where it had been used.
Did you follow up with her after talking with her on the 22nd to get any documents?
Yes, I did. She printed out what she had shown me. I believe she showed it to me on her cell phone. Okay. And she printed it out. I went to our house and picked it up.
Approach your honor.
Yes.
So I'm showing you what is marked as State's Exhibit number 149 for identification. What is State's 149 for identification?
It is a copy of a credit card from Wells Fargo Bank. And it's also the records that Ms. Brenda Boyd surrendered to me on the 22nd.
And how do you know that those are a copy of the records that Ms. Boyd gave you on October the 22nd?
My initials and badge number, and I wrote on here received from Brenda Boyd Pettit.
So it states 149 for identification fairly and accurately depict the records that you received from Brenda Boyd after you met her at Alita Boyd's apartment on October 22nd.
Yes, sir. They did.
Move to introduce States 149 into evidence, tender 149 to defense for inspection.
May we approach?
Yes. All right, State.
And so I move to introduce the evidence that's been subjected into, I guess that's for ruling out.
That'll be sustained.
After you met and talked with Ms. Boyd and she gave you document 149 for identification, what did you do?
I had learned that Miss Boyd, the deceased, Paula Boyd, also had a bank account with Wood Forest National Bank. So when I left the apartment that day, I knew that there was a Wood Forest National Bank branch at a Walmart at Days of All in I-10. I went by there to get a point of contact so I could get the records from that particular bank.
And did you go anywhere else on the 22nd or the 23rd?
Yes, sir. On the 22nd, I went to the, I believe it was called a Quick Stuff. It's at 8558 Huebner. I went by there and the evening clerk was on duty. I asked her about video and the ATM. While I was there, I looked at the ATM. I found a receipt in the trash can next to the ATM, and I compared the serial numbers on that ATM receipt with the serial number that I had seen on Ms. Paula Boyd's bank records, and it appeared to be the same ATM based on the serial number. So I knew I was at the right ATM, so I asked the clerk if she knew how to access the ATM. She said no, the manager knows how to do it. I asked the clerk on duty if she knew how to access the video system. She said no, the manager knows how to do it. And she contacted the manager for me. She called her on the phone. Manager's name was Veronica Garza. And I just told her, I said, I need to look at your video system and I need to check your ATM receipts. And she told me she would be at work the next day from 6 to 1.
And so the next day, what day is that?
That would be Friday, October 23rd.
And so what did you do? Excuse me. Sir, I'm showing you what has already been marked as states number 128 for identification. Inside is a white envelope, and on the outside of the envelope is written receipts. You recognize inside of those are 2 receipts, transaction record.
I'm going to object to Mr. Harris testifying regarding something not in evidence.
For clarity of the record, do you
All right,
recognize?
that'll be overruled.
Do you recognize the contents of states number 128 for identification?
Yes, sir, I do.
What are the contents of states 128 for identification?
I'm going to object, once again, he's testifying to something not in evidence.
That'll be sustained.
What are they?
Same objection, it's the same question.
All right, let me hear the witness's answer.
One is a receipt that I pulled from the trash can that verified the serial number of the ATM. And the other is a receipt where I used my personal ATM card to check to make sure that the ATM time was accurate. And I blacked out my personal information on that particular receipt, but it was just for comparison.
These are the, objects you took that day? I think you said the 23rd of October, 2015.
That would, yes, sir, I believe that was, no, that would have been on the 22nd. Yes, sir.
And these are the actual documents that you collected yourself.
Yes.
Move to introduce states 128 into evidence. Tender states 128 to defense inspection.
May we approach, Judge?
Yes. All right, state.
Aside from the ATM machine located at 8558, was there any other surveillance equipment at that store, 8558 Eden Road?
Yes, sir, they had a video surveillance system.
And what did you learn from the documents, the receipts you collected there, states 128 for identification? What did you learn?
That would call to him to testify from something not in evidence. I have checked.
Right, that'll be overruled.
What did you learn from it?
I learned the serial number of the ATM terminal.
And why was that important or relevant to your investigation?
It was relevant because if I have the terminal serial number on the victim's transactions, then I know that I'm at the right ATM.
So having looked at the items in states 128, did that further your investigation? Once you knew, did you find out you were at the right ATM?
Yes, sir.
That furthered your investigation?
Yes, sir. Once I found out I was at the right ATM, the next question was the transaction on the ATM captured on the store video system.
Now, when we say store video system, and with that, Your Honor, it was testimony as to the relevancy of state moves to readmit 128 in the evidence.
Defense?
I reurge my same objections. I reurge my same objections.
May I have parties approach, please? But this is where everyone can get their exercise in. So remember, you've heard some evidence, but you're not allowed to discuss with each other anything that you've heard or anyone else. So I'm gonna let you all take your 5-minute break. If everyone could rise for the jurors, please. All right, everyone, please be seated. State.
Yeah, again, I re-urge my motion to introduce states 128 and its contents, both the receipt the detective has testified he ran his own card through that machine on, and the one that he found in the trash.
All right, so with regards to state's exhibit number 128, the item that was found in the trash, the objection will be sustained as far as relevancy, will be overruled as far as hearsay. The other item that the detective ran, that will be overruled as to hearsay and overruled as to relevancy. So that will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And that number is,
Right now it is Your Honor, we will call the admitted one 128B. 128B.
But in the envelope is 128,
Yes, ma'am.
so
128 Bravo.
Which is it?
Yes.
so then admitted it's 128B.
Yes, ma'am.
State,
What else did you do while you were at the evening facility 23rd?
On the 23rd, that's when I actually met with the manager of the convenience store. And I asked her to run a query for me on a credit card ending in 7838 to see what time it was used. She was able to do that. And I had a time frame that I would have been looking for. And I don't recall the exact time. It was 3:07 or so, or I think it showed up on the receipt.
Objection, that's gonna be, he's testifying to hearsay.
Don't recall he quoted what anyone said. He was reporting what was done, and then he stopped at, I don't recall the time frame.
all right, then he stopped at, I don't recall the time frame.
I thought he said a time. Okay, my bad.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, if he said a time frame, then it will be hearsay. If he said, I don't recall, and that's where he stopped, then there is no hearsay.
Okay. All right. What was it you were looking at that had the time or time frame? What was it? What was it you were looking at?
I was looking at receipts that were pulled by the store manager. She had access to the machine, and I needed a time frame to what I was looking for is when the victim's credit card was used, because it was used on the 21st when we found her deceased. Then I would need to know who's using her card to find out who's using her card. Maybe they have permission. I don't know. So I got a time frame. The manager advised me that their
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
I learned that their video system was stopped.
Just 1 moment, Sean.
Yes.
Stamp. My apologies.
We approach this.
Yes.